Right, guys, looking at the second one for migration and settlement. Again, please watch the first one before you get onto this one. As usual, have a look at the questions I put out in the email to answer alongside, but also be making notes as you go through. Again, you need to remember the key concepts here, and I'm assuming you've watched the first one, so you understand the way of life for the Plains Indians and the early government policies. Okay, so we're going to be focusing on migration. The big questions really revolve around migration, settlement, development, conflict and tension, lawlessness. So just be aware of that as you go through. Might be worth writing those down just to think, right, how does everything connect? And when you're looking at it, you're looking at economic reasons, religious, opportunity, manifest destiny, and they're really looking at push and pull factors. Initially you have people like missionaries, so these are Christians who are trying to convert people, and prospectors who are looking for gold. You've also got the early fur traders, fur trappers, who go out looking for beavers. So there's a few things just to be watch out for. So, first thing you need to be aware of, there were reports of how wonderful the West was, which came back to the East, and people were amazed by these stories. Think about Elizabeth. When we're looking at that exploration topic, it's similar here. They're getting this back, and they're like, okay, I want to try this. I want to actually see if I can go out and reach this, utopia. So missionaries would report this as well. And others came from people who wanted to make money from the new settlers. So they're trying to track people across. The population is growing because a lot of people are coming in from Europe. A lot of Irish, with the Irish potato famine, are coming across. It leads to overcrowding in the east, and a lot of people are poor, so they've got this reason to move and go and find wealth. And then the financial crisis in the east hits. This completely collapses the banks. It leads to high unemployment. And again, it's a real important factor for why people are being pushed out this financial crisis. So again, it's good to have that idea of what the West actually looks like here. So we're going to be focusing, as you might have guessed, on the Oregon Trail today. But it's this reason to go west. Before the Oregon Trail, it's very hard to cross this land. There's no, especially if you've got your belongings and wagons and stuff. So that's why the Oregon Trail is going to be so important. People were promised this cheap or free farming in Oregon and California. Again, it's why the gaining of these territories is so important. So it's an opportunity for people to go and better their lives. And the Oregon Trail, it's the only real way to get across the mountain with your wagons. And it's publicized, that's important, note that down, by Jedediah Smith, and the other fur trappers who are using the route, clearing the scrub, making it safe to cross rivers. And when people know this, they're more likely to take it. When they hear it's safe and they hear it's a direct route and they hear people use it, it attracts more people to use it. So think of that importance, okay? There were trail reports were published by people like John Fremont, who were quite influential. They would use guidebooks that migrants would use on the trail. And this another real important factor that convinces people to make that journey. The government as well is important. So the government then encourages people to move to Oregon as they kind of want to expand their own territory instead of sharing it with the British. So in 41, the government actually provides 30 grand for an expedition to map the Oregon Trail and publish reports to help migrants get to Oregon. So again, this mapping, this publishing really encourages people to make that journey. And in 1841, a party of 60 made the trip. Were using the Oregon Trail. 100 people by 42, 900 by 43, and then you get bigger numbers used in the Great Emigration in 1843. Okay, so look at the amount of people who are starting to cross, and this is partly because the government are advertising this. The government are saying, take it, make this trip. And then gold. Gold is a great one because, get rich quick. That's the kind of story of gold. I mean, it's not necessarily true, but it certainly attracts people to make that journey. And gold hits in 1848, and it leads to really people moving across in 1849. They're known as the 49ers, 200,000 people making this journey. And not only that, the thing with gold is not just it attracts people to move, but people are going to start building towns and develop it. So it links to development, because these prospectors, they need food, they need drink, they need entertainment. These mining towns kind of pop up around the gold. Again, think about that when you're revising. Think about how many factors these link into. And gold's great because, again, it even leads to lawlessness, because you get bandits kind of waiting on the outskirts to see if people find gold and then attack them to take the gold. Okay. Manifest destiny. If you don't know what manifest destiny is at this point, that's a worry. Manifest destiny goes throughout this period. It's the idea that the West was destined to be American and to be populated with the bringing of civilization, the bringing of education. And that's the picture that's commonly associated with it. That manifest destiny was the right of the Americans to dominate the Americas. Okay, so we're going to have a little look at the Oregon Trail in a little bit more detail. So I should have everything on this slide. So again, pause it at any point to make a note. But the first thing is the Oregon Trail was 3,200 kilometers long, and it would take several months to complete. So you had to plan. It needed to be completed before winter, because you don't want to get stuck in the mountains. You couldn't start until the April grass had grown, because you need to feed your animals along the way. You needed enough food to make the journey. It was slow, because the oxen, the big oxes, they were slow, who were dragging the wagons. And most people would join a wagon trail, which is a huge kind of train of wagons following each other, going in larger groups, safer but slower, and you needed different skills to survive on the way as well. The dangers: you could get ill, you could also get stuck. Snakes, rattlesnakes bite you, you'd die. 20,000 people would die along the trail for these reasons, but cholera is a big killer. Cholera for medicine, this contaminated water, that's killing off a lot of these travelers. And there was a fear of being attacked by the Plains Indians, but that was less likely. It was more like the stories and the reports going back to the people in the East were terrified of these Plains Indians, that they see the war parties. But the war parties don't really attack the settlers often. It's very rare if they do. So it was more of that story of fear than actually being a threat. So I'm going to give you an example of a successful one and a failed one. So the first one's the Donner Party. So they are 300 migrants, 60 wagons led by the Donner brothers. Started the Oregon Trail in 1846. They were equipped but had more elderly and young than was normal. They split at Fort Bridger in the Rocky Mountains. The brothers and 80 migrants, they try a shortcut. Basically, this was a guide that was written by a guy called Lansford Hastings, who had wrote about the shortcut, but he'd never actually taken it himself. And it was not short at all. It just caused delays. The route was not marked. There was no safe crossings to get across the river. There were areas where there was no grass for their livestock. There were no forts to resupply. They hit the mountains in winter, and if you were paying attention in the last slide, that's a problem, hitting the mountains in winter. So the snowstorms, they trap them there, their livestock die, they run out of food, start eating each other, and they're found, and half of them are dead, half of them are eaten. It's a story that is well known to warn people about poor planning and not really taking advice in this crossing. On the other side, we've got the Mormons, an interesting religious group, but they are our example of a successful migration. So they were a religious group that was established by Joseph Smith. Now, he claimed an angel had told him the whereabouts of 2 buried golden plates. Now, Smith said he dug them up, translated them, and this is the Book of Mormon, a great basis for religion. And but the Mormons, they face hostility in the East. Now, they settle in Ohio, Missouri, and Illinois, but they just face hostility. People don't like them. People don't like their version of Christianity. So they make a decision to move west. So Joseph Smith, he's killed in Illinois, and the new leader is Brigham Young, and he decides, right, let's get out of the claws of the U.S. government. Let's get away from them, and let's actually establish ourselves. Let's actually create a place for us. And this was going to be the Great Salt Lake Valley, which wasn't part of the USA. So they moved west. It took immense amount of planning, and that's important. So they didn't want to get stuck in the mountains like the Donner Party. So Young spent basically the summer staying in Ohio, waiting for the right time to leave. Now, in April 1847, he sent an advanced party out to mark the way for the rest of the Mormons. So very clever. He gets a group to ensure you can safely travel there. This advanced party located the water supplies. They planted crops as well, which was clever, that would have food available for when the other groups come. They constructed the fords across rivers. Look at how that's already so much better than the Donner Party. And in July, they arrived at the Salt Lake Valley. So the rest of the Mormons, they set off in a number of 1,500. They follow the same route as Young, arriving in August, and then you get 70,000 more. These numbers are great to show how successful this was. I wouldn't pay too much attention to that, but importantly, it's why did they succeed? Okay, so that's the story of their journey, but then you need to be understanding, why was this a successful migration? Salt Lake was harsh. The lake was salty. The lands were too poor to grow crops. But Young's leadership was so important. And these 4 things I'm going to put up on here, they're integral to why he was successful. So Mormons believed that Young was God's prophet and obeyed him completely. There was no debates. There was no challenges. No individual owned any land. Everybody just kind of worked for their community. So everybody listened to Brigham Young, so his decision was final, and it made things far simpler and easier. The Mormons built the irrigation systems from freshwater streams, which meant they could grow crops, and people worked together to build and maintain them. New settlements were planned as well, so each settlement was designed to produce different products, so everybody you could then trade amongst themselves. It was like self-sufficiency. Young then sent out a mix of skilled people to each settlement, like blacksmiths, carpenters, millers. And new settlements, they spread out away from Salt Lake Valley into areas with more reliable water supply. Products from these settlements, vegetables, flowers, timber, metals, they were brought by the Great Salt Lake City. So a great example of a success. We're also going to have a look at problems of actually farming on the plains, because at this point, people are just traveling through them, trying to get to the other side. But there were certainly problems with actually settling and farming the land. You should be aware that there's no trees on the plains, hence called the plains, which means there's no windbreaker to stop their crops being blown all over the place. They had to use they couldn't build things because they didn't have the wood. They had to kind of import in. So they used the dry sod, which is the hard mud, to build their houses. They used buffalo dung as well for a heat source. Their wells were, had to dig down, and it was hard work to get the water up. And families lived miles away from each other. So if they're in trouble, it took a while to kind of get support. And also think even the crops, the European wheat just was crushed in the weather. So why did white settlement increase? Well, it was simply that belief that in Oregon and California, it was just like the most amazing place to go and farm. And the goal was to head west to set up a farm in good conditions the coastal towns California and Oregon offered. Climate was nice to grow wheat as well. And by 1850, farmers were producing so much wheat that they could export it. So that means they've got enough to survive, so they can actually sell it and get rich. So there's a lot of money for big businesses, and the US government promoted this because it was a way to enrich the nation. And no whites had ever farmed the Great Plains, so the Americans thought, we can use this as well. We need to encourage people to go and farm on the plains. But we'll know until 1862, they struggled to convince people to do that. And again, just a graphic to show the issues. You can pause and read through them. Right, so You've got problems with water shortages, so there's a lack of water. There's not much rainfall, so that's tough for the crops. You've got extreme weather, which is just blowing the crops all over the place. It's difficult to have anything survive. Lack of fuel meant they had nothing to burn, so these are legit problems. Dirt and disease, again, the house was basically built of mud, and you got bugs and everything kind of crawling into the house, which was again problematic. Building materials, they're very expensive to get the wood to your farm. Plowing was difficult. The hard dry soil with thick roots, which were could break the equipment. The natural hazards, so insects, locusts eating their crops. Animals could trample their crops. This is why barbed wire becomes important in 1874. Growing crops were hard to grow on the plains. Bit of a typo. So they're hard to grow crops because of the weather. Remember, later on we'll look at red turkey wheat, which is the solution to this. And that's a run through of early migration. Okay, so again, we'll do this in sequenced order. Hopefully you found it useful.